It started on what seemed like an ordinary evening. We had just finished dinner, the usual discussions about household matters fading into something sharper, more charged. She looked at me exasperated when I asked about a bill that needed paying, a routine question. But her response was anything but routine. With a tone that cut through the air, she said, "I'm not your property." Her words hung in the room like a storm cloud. At first, I didn't know how to react. Was it an accusation? A statement of defiance? A declaration of independence? The way she said it, the tone, the look in her eyes, felt like she was drawing a line in the sand, challenging the foundation of what I thought our relationship was built on. I didn't argue. What could I say? I just nodded. But inside, something shifted. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was something colder, something resolute. As I cleared the table in silence, her words echoed in my mind. I thought about the years I had spent sacrificing, working long hours, handling problems, making sure her life ran smoothly. And now she was telling me that none of it mattered, that in her eyes, I was treating her like property. That night, I lay awake replaying the conversation. Was she right? Had I been controlling? Had I reduced our relationship to something transactional? Or was this just her way of shedding the responsibilities we had both agreed to when we got married? It was impossible to know for sure. But one thing became crystal clear. She didn't see herself as accountable to me in the way I had always seen myself as accountable to her. And that's when the quiet resolve set in. Fine. If she didn't want to be my property, I wouldn't treat her as such. But that also meant she couldn't expect me to shoulder the burden of responsibility for her. It wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness. If she wanted independence, I would give it to her. Completely. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. But I was already different. No grand announcements, no confrontations. I would let the situation speak for itself. When she asked if I'd pay a bill that week, I simply said, "You can handle it." She gave me a confused look but said nothing. It was a small thing, but to me, it was symbolic. I wasn't going to be her caretaker anymore. Throughout the day, I noticed more opportunities to let her take the reins. When the kitchen faucet started leaking, I didn't grab my toolbox. When her car needed gas, I didn't take it to the station like I always had. When she texted me at lunch to remind me about the insurance payment, I told her, "You can pay it. The account details are in the folder." Each time she hesitated, confused, maybe even annoyed, but she didn't push back. Not yet. That evening, I made dinner for myself, left the dishes in the sink, and went back to my own tasks. No offers to do anything for her. It wasn't spite. It was a quiet demonstration of what life without my constant responsibility would look like. And then, she finally broke the silence. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" She asked, her voice sharp. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. "You said you're not my property, right?" Her expression hardened. "Yeah, I said that." "Well," I replied evenly, "if you're not my property, then you're not my responsibility either." Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. She stood there for a moment, staring at me, then turned and walked out of the room. A few seconds later, the bedroom door closed with a sharp click. The next few days were a quiet unraveling. I stuck to my plan. Calm. Detached. Removing myself from tasks and responsibilities I had once handled without a second thought. And the cracks in our routine started to show. By midweek, the tension reached a boiling point. She came home from work to find the power shut off. I had known the bill was due. I could have paid it in minutes, but this time I didn't. She stormed into the living room, her face flushed with anger. "The power's out!" she shouted. "Why didn't you pay the bill?" I met her gaze calmly. "You knew it was due. The account details are in the folder." She threw her hands up. "Why are you doing this? You're being so childish." I stood up slowly, letting her words hang in the air. "Childish? You said you're not my property. I'm respecting that. But if you're not my property, then I'm not your caretaker. You want independence? Fine. But independence means taking responsibility for your own life." Her expression faltered for just a second, just long enough for me to see something crack. Then, with a bitter laugh, she shook her head. "This isn't independence. This is just you being petty." I didn't argue. I let her words linger in the air as I walked past her into the kitchen. I wasn't interested in convincing her. I wanted her to understand. That night, she spent an hour on the phone trying to sort out the power bill. I could hear the frustration in her voice as she navigated the automated system, something I would have handled effortlessly before. Watching her struggle wasn't satisfying, but it reinforced my decision. If she wanted me to step back, I would do so completely, even if it made life harder for both of us. By the end of the week, the house felt different, not just because of the mess piling up, not just because of the unpaid bills, the undone chores, the lingering silence. It was different because the unspoken truth between us was finally too loud to ignore. She had drawn a line in the sand, and I had simply stepped back, letting her stand on the other side, alone. What started as an ordinary evening unraveled into something much deeper. A simple discussion about bills turned tense when she snapped, "I'm not your property." The words lingered, their weight shifting something inside me. At first, I questioned myself. Had I been controlling? But as the silence between us stretched, my thoughts solidified. If she wanted independence, she would have it, completely. I withdrew, not out of spite, but out of fairness. No more paying bills without discussion, no more anticipating her needs. At first, she barely noticed. But as tasks piled up, unpaid bills, an empty fridge, small inconveniences I had always smoothed over, the tension grew unbearable. One morning, she stood in the kitchen, frustration evident. "This can't keep going," she said, slamming the fridge shut. "We're supposed to be a team." "Are we?" I asked. "Teams share responsibility, but you made it clear I'm not in yours anymore." She insisted that wasn't what she meant, but I held my ground. "Every time I made life easier, you let me. And when I spoke up about the weight of it, you called it control." Tears welled in her eyes. "So what now? Do we just keep tearing each other apart?" I exhaled, staring into my coffee. "I don't know. But I do know I'm done being the only one carrying the weight." The silence that followed wasn't a battle. It was exhaustion. The days stretched in uneasy limbo, both of us too stubborn to admit what we were losing. Then the cracks began to show. Missed obligations, strain at work, calls from worried friends. The standoff was affecting more than just us. One night, I found her on the couch, laptop closed, eyes red. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. For the first time, she didn't look defiant. She looked lost. And suddenly, the point I had been making didn't matter anymore. The next morning, she sat at the table with a stack of bills. "Can we go through these together?" she asked. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't defiance either. I sat down and we started sorting through the mess. Small shifts followed. She took more initiative. I stepped in when it felt right. The tension didn't disappear overnight, but real conversations began to replace silence. "Did you really think I didn't appreciate you?" she asked one evening. "Sometimes it felt that way," I admitted. Like everything I did was expected but never noticed. Her nod was small but sincere. "I didn't mean for it to feel that way. I just forgot to say when I needed help." It wasn't a magical reconciliation, just slow, mutual effort. Over time, we found a balance, not of one person carrying the other, but of partnership. The house became less chaotic, but the scars of our standoff remained. a reminder of how close we had come to losing everything. One night, she reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "I don't want to go back to how things were," she said. "But I don't want to lose this either." I squeezed back. "Me neither." And just like that, we found our way forward, not as obligations, but as partners, navigating the mess together.